Some doors are closed by men who forget who truly owns the building. The glass doors of Richmond Civic Hall burst open with a sharp metallic thud, and every conversation on the front steps died at once. Angela Brooks stumbled one step onto the granite landing, not from weakness but from surprise, her folder of neatly organized papers slipping from her hands as pages scattered across the morning breeze. For a second, no one moved. The line of residents waiting for the public hearing froze in place. A man halfway through his coffee lowered the cup without taking a sip. A woman holding a stroller tightened her grip. Then Officer Daniel Carter stepped through the doorway behind her, broad shoulders squared, jaw clenched, one hand resting near the badge on his chest as if it were permission itself. "I said you're not coming in," he announced loudly enough for everyone within 30 feet to hear. "This hearing is for citizens with business, not people trying to cause problems." A few uneasy chuckles slipped from the crowd. Others looked down at the sidewalk, suddenly fascinated by their own shoes. Angela said nothing. She was dressed simply in a navy blazer, dark slacks, and low heels dusted by the street. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her expression calm in a way that made Daniel's anger look louder. She bent down and began gathering her papers one by one, never rushing, never trembling. Daniel shook his head and gave a smug little laugh. "You heard me the first time," he said. "Move along." Richmond's spring air carried the scent of rain that had passed before sunrise. Water still clung to the curb in thin silver lines. Traffic rolled by on Broad Street, but on those steps the world felt strangely still. Angela lifted the final sheet, tapped the stack square against her palm, and looked up at him. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. It wasn't fear in her voice. It wasn't anger either. It was certainty, quiet and cold. Daniel smirked. More sure than ever. He turned toward the crowd and spread one hand like a host presenting a joke. "Folks, hearing starts in 10 minutes. Let's keep the entrance clear." Some people laughed because laughter is easier than courage. Others shifted uncomfortably. A teenager near the rail had his phone raised chest high, recording everything. Angela glanced past Daniel toward the lobby beyond the glass doors. Marble floors. Security desk. City seal on the far wall. Then she lowered her eyes to the folder in her hand. Across the top page, nearly hidden beneath her thumb, was an embossed federal crest pressed into thick white paper. No one noticed except an elderly man in line, whose brow furrowed as he leaned forward. Daniel certainly didn't. He was too busy straightening his uniform and enjoying the small theater of control. "Last warning," he said. "Walk away." Angela stepped aside from the doorway instead of arguing. That seemed to satisfy him. He gave a short nod and turned back inside, muttering, "That's what I thought." The doors closed behind him. A murmur moved through the crowd. Some pitied her. Some judged her. Most simply accepted what they had seen because a badge had narrated it for them. Angela remained on the landing, one hand resting on the folder, eyes fixed on the street. Then, from 2 blocks away, the low synchronized hum of engines rolled through the damp morning air. Heads turned. 3 black SUVs came into view, gliding towards Civic Hall in a perfect line. They stopped at the curb with deliberate precision. Doors opened at once. Men and women in dark suits stepped out, scanning the entrance with practiced eyes. The crowd fell silent again, but this time it was a different silence. Heavy. Expectant. One of the suited officials looked directly at Angela, placed a hand over his chest, and started up the steps fast. Daniel Carter, now visible through the glass lobby doors, froze mid-stride as he saw who was coming. The man in the charcoal suit reached Angela first and stopped one step below her, slightly out of breath from moving so quickly. Then, in full view of everyone gathered outside Richmond Civic Hall, he straightened his tie and spoke with the kind of respect that changes the temperature of a room. "Director Brooks, we are ready for you inside." A hush swept across the front steps so complete that even the city traffic beyond the curb seemed distant. Angela gave a small nod, calm as ever. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," she said. The official stepped aside immediately. Behind him, two more suited staff members moved with quiet precision, one carrying a leather portfolio, the other speaking softly into an earpiece. People in line exchanged looks of disbelief. The woman with the stroller covered her mouth. The teenager recording lowered his phone for 1 second, then raised it higher. Through the glass doors, Officer Daniel Carter had not moved. He stood in the lobby like a statue carved out of regret. His confident posture was gone now, replaced by the stiffness of a man trying to understand how the ground beneath him had shifted so fast. Angela descended 1 step, then another, not away from the building this time, but toward the waiting officials. She passed the scattered embarrassment Daniel had left on the steps as if it no longer belonged to her. Mr. Hayes opened the door himself. No one had opened a door for Daniel in years. Inside the lobby, fluorescent lights reflected off polished marble floors and the bronze city seal mounted on the far wall. Employees who had ignored the scene moments earlier now stood perfectly still behind desks and security stations. Angela entered without hurry. Daniel cleared his throat and attempted a smile that never fully formed. If there has been some misunderstanding, I was only following entry procedures. Angela stopped 6 feet from him. Close enough for him to see there was no anger in her eyes, only memory. You were not following procedure, she said evenly. You were following assumptions. No one in the lobby breathed loudly enough to be heard. Daniel glanced at the surrounding staff as if hoping for support, but people who admire power often lose interest the moment it weakens. I did not know who you were, he said, voice lower now. Angela tilted her head slightly. That is the problem, Officer Carter. You believed respect required identification. Mr. Hayes handed her the leather portfolio. She opened it, revealing official documents stamped with federal insignia and city authorization marks. The same crest that had gone unnoticed in her folder outside now gleamed under the lobby lights. Angela signed 1 page with quick certainty, then passed it back. Begin the review immediately, she said. All witness statements, camera footage, access logs, and prior complaints. Daniel's face lost what little color remained. Prior complaints, he repeated before he could stop himself. Mr. Hayes answered for her. Yes, Officer Carter. All of them. Somewhere near the security desk, a clerk dropped a pen. The tiny sound echoed like thunder. Angela turned toward the hearing chamber hallway, where rows of citizens waited for a public session about misconduct accountability in city services. The irony was almost too sharp to touch. This meeting was delayed long enough, she said. Then she paused and looked back at Daniel one final time. You threw out the person assigned to investigate whether this building treats people fairly. His mouth opened, but no words arrived. Behind him, another officer slowly removed Daniel's access card from the desk terminal and placed it aside. No accusation. No drama. Just a quiet change in status that everyone understood. Angela walked down the corridor with measured steps, officials falling in behind her. On the front steps outside, the crowd that had laughed minutes earlier now pressed closer to the windows, desperate to see what truth looked like once it finally entered the room. The hearing chamber had been built to look important long before it had learned how to be fair. High ceilings, dark wood panels, rows of polished benches, and a city flag standing in the corner like a promise too rarely kept. By the time Angela Brooks entered, every seat was filled. Residents who had come to complain about lost permits, ignored reports, and unanswered misconduct claims now sat forward with fresh attention. Word had traveled faster than any announcement. They knew something had happened outside. They just did not know how much. Angela walked to the front table reserved for lead investigators and placed her folder down with gentle precision. Mr. Hayes took the seat beside her. 2 compliance officers opened laptops and arranged files in silence. Across the room, city department heads shifted uncomfortably, each suddenly aware that ordinary Tuesday routines had ended the moment she stepped through the door. At the side entrance, Officer Daniel Carter was escorted in by internal security, not in handcuffs, not in disgraceful spectacle, but without the swagger he had worn an hour earlier. He was instructed to sit in the witness row until called. That alone said everything. Daniel lowered himself into the chair and stared straight ahead. He did not look at the audience. He did not look at Angela. Men like him often believed humiliation only existed when directed downward. Now he was learning it rises too. Angela adjusted the microphone. Her voice, when it came, was calm enough to make people lean in. This special session of the Richmond Civic Accountability Review Board is now in order. Even the air seemed to settle. Today we will examine whether authority in this building has been exercised lawfully, consistently, and without prejudice. The last two words landed heavier than the rest. A murmur moved through the back row. Angela continued. We will begin with an incident that occurred on the front steps 23 minutes ago. Daniel's eyes closed briefly. Someone in the audience whispered, "That fast?" Angela opened a thin binder. Camera footage from the entrance has already been secured. Audio from 3 bystander devices has been voluntarily submitted. Security logs confirm no threat alerts, no active restrictions, and no lawful basis for removal. She looked up, not at Daniel, but through him. Yet removal occurred. Mr. Hayes pressed a button, and a large screen at the side of the chamber illuminated. Grainy footage from the front entrance appeared. There was Daniel standing tall, gesturing sharply. There was Angela gathering papers from the wet stone. There was the crowd watching. No dramatic soundtrack. No narration. Just truth in ordinary lighting. It was somehow worse that way. Daniel shifted in his seat. The board chair, an older woman named Patricia Lang, folded her hands. Officer Carter, do you dispute the authenticity of this recording? Daniel swallowed. No, Do you dispute that you denied entry before verifying credentials? A pause. Stretched too long. No, Angela closed the binder softly. Do you believe respect should be delayed until paperwork is presented? Several people in the audience nodded before they realized they were visible. Daniel finally looked at her. I made a mistake. Angela held his gaze. Mistakes are accidents. Patterns are choices. Mr. Hayes slid another folder across the table to the board chair. Patricia opened it, then frowned deeper with every page. 7 prior complaints, she said aloud. 3 involving dismissive conduct. 2 alleging selective enforcement. 1 concerning inappropriate remarks. 1 unresolved due to missing witness follow-up. The chamber stirred like wind through leaves. Daniel's shoulders sank inch by inch. Angela did not raise her voice. She did not need to. When people file complaints and nothing changes, she said, they stop reporting problems. Then institutions begin to rock quietly. In the back row, the woman with the stroller from outside lifted her child higher and listened with tears in her eyes. For the first time in years, this room sounded less like government and more like consequence. The room remained still for several seconds after Angela's last words, as if no one wanted to be the first person to move inside a truth they had helped ignore. Then Patricia Lang, chair of the review board, adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Officer Daniel Carter. You may respond, she said. Daniel cleared his throat, but confidence did not return with the sound. I have served this city for 12 years, he began. I have worked long shifts, responded to emergencies, and put this job first. What happened outside was a misunderstanding under pressure. He spoke toward the board, careful not to look at the audience where ordinary people sat with extraordinary memories of men just like him. Angela listened without interruption, one hand resting on her folder. Daniel continued. People do not understand what officers deal with every day. We make fast decisions. Sometimes they look worse afterward than they felt in the moment. A few department heads nodded faintly, the old reflex of protecting their own rising one last time. Patricia turned to Angela. Director Brooks. Angela stood slowly. Pressure does not create character, she said. It reveals it. Her voice was even, almost gentle, which made every word travel farther. She opened another file and removed printed transcripts. Over the last 6 months, our office conducted an anonymous culture audit across multiple city departments. We interviewed staff, contractors, residents, and former employees. She placed copies before the board. One name appeared more than any other in reports describing intimidation at entrances, dismissive treatment, and selective courtesy. Daniel's jaw tightened. He already knew the name. Angela did not say it immediately. She let silence do what shouting never could. Then she looked up. "Officer Carter." A low murmur rolled through the chamber. Mr. Hayes activated the screen again. This time there were no videos, only excerpts from statements gathered weeks before anyone knew Angela would arrive in person. A disabled veteran reported being mocked for moving slowly through security. A young mother said she was told to come back dressed appropriately while others entered freely. A maintenance worker described being ignored for years until a suited executive arrived and received instant assistance. None of the statements mentioned race directly. They did not need to. Bias often hides behind manners. Daniel leaned forward. "These are anonymous. Anyone can say anything." Patricia lifted one page. Several are corroborated by timestamps, staffing logs, and witness overlap. Daniel looked toward the department heads, but their eyes had turned practical now. Institutions defend people only until the cost becomes visible. Angela stepped from behind the table and addressed the room, not just the board. Disrespect rarely begins with headlines. It begins with small moments people are told to forget. A smirk. A delay. A different tone. A rule used on one person and waived for another. In the back row, the elderly man from the front steps slowly removed his cap. The woman with the stroller nodded through tears she had tried to hide. Angela continued. By the time the public notices a broken system, the damage has usually been practiced for years. Daniel stood abruptly, then caught himself and lowered back into the chair. "So this was planned?" he asked. "You came here to trap me?" Angela met his stare without heat. "No, Officer Carter. You trapped yourself. I simply arrived on time." Even Patricia Lang could not hide the brief lift of one eyebrow. Mr. Hayes handed Angela a final envelope. She opened it and removed a formal notice bearing city and federal seals. "Based on documented patterns, today's conduct, an immediate risk to public trust, I am recommending temporary suspension pending full review." The words were clean, administrative, almost quiet. Yet they struck harder than anger ever could. Daniel's shoulders dropped as though the weight of 12 years had chosen that exact moment to return. Outside the chamber windows, rain began again, tapping softly against the glass. Inside, people who had once felt invisible watched a badge learn what accountability sounds like when spoken clearly. No one spoke for several heartbeats after the suspension notice was read. Rain tapped steadily against the chamber windows, soft but relentless, like time keeping score. Officer Daniel Carter sat motionless, hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles had gone pale. For years he had worn authority like armor. Now, in a room full of witnesses, it felt more like borrowed clothing. Patricia Lang broke the silence first. "The recommendation is entered into record. Effective immediately, Officer Carter is relieved of public contact duties pending investigation." Her voice was formal, but even procedure carried weight when truth had prepared the room. A uniformed supervisor stepped forward from the side wall where he had been standing unnoticed all morning. Sergeant Leon Mercer was a broad, gray-haired man known in the building for speaking little and observing everything. He held out one hand calmly. "Badge and access card, Daniel." The request was not loud. It did not need to be. Daniel looked up as if hoping someone would object, someone would remind the room of old favors, old friendships, old excuses. No one moved. Department heads studied papers that suddenly interested them deeply. Staff members focused on screens gone dark. People who had once laughed outside now watched with the solemn attention reserved for rare moments when consequences finally arrive. Daniel unclipped the badge from his belt slowly. Metal touched wood as Sergeant Mercer placed it on the evidence table beside the hearing files. The sound was small, but it seemed to echo through every polished surface in the chamber. Angela Brooks did not smile. She did not gloat. Vindication often looks quieter than revenge. She simply opened another folder. "This review is not about one man," she said. "It is about a culture that taught him he would be protected." Several faces along the side wall stiffened. Angela continued. "When disrespect is tolerated because it is convenient, institutions train it to grow." Mr. Hayes distributed packets to each board member. Inside were recommendations for policy reform, entrance camera retention, bias response training, independent complaint tracking, public access audits, and quarterly transparency reports. Practical steps. Unromantic steps. The kind that actually change things. Patricia read the first page, then the second. "These measures could have prevented today," she murmured. "They could have prevented years," Angela replied. In the back row, the elderly man who had noticed the federal seal outside slowly raised his hand. Patricia nodded to him. He stood carefully, leaning on a cane polish smoothed by long use. "My name is Walter Green," he said. "I served this country in Korea. I have been asked for identification in this building 6 times in 2 years and never once with a hello." His voice trembled only from age, not fear. "Today is the first day I believe somebody wrote it down." A hush fell deeper than before. Then the young mother with the stroller stood next. "I was told to come back dressed properly when I asked for housing assistance," she said. The man behind me in gym shorts went right in. Another resident rose. Then another. Stories that had once lived privately now crossed the room in plain daylight. Not dramatic stories. Familiar stories. The kind systems depend on people keeping to themselves. Daniel lowered his eyes further with each voice. Angela listened to every speaker as if each sentence mattered equally, because it did. When the final resident sat down, she closed her folder and looked toward the board. "Trust is not restored by speeches," she said. "It is restored when ordinary people stop expecting humiliation as part of the process." Patricia Lang straightened in her chair. "Then let the record show," she said, lifting the gavel, "that beginning today, they should expect something else." She struck once. Sharp. Clean. Final enough to be heard beyond the chamber doors. In the hallway outside, staff members who had ignored suffering for years suddenly began rearranging signs, opening service windows, and greeting citizens by name. Sometimes change enters grandly. Sometimes it arrives because one person refused to be dismissed in the rain. By noon, Richmond Civic Hall no longer felt like the same building. The rain had passed, leaving the sidewalks dark and shining beneath a pale spring sun. Inside, the lobby that once moved with practiced indifference now carried a strange new energy. Security officers greeted people before asking questions. Clerks stepped from behind counters to help seniors with forms. A fresh sign had been printed in large black letters and taped beside the entrance desk: "All visitors will be treated with courtesy and respect." It looked simple enough. Yet many passing through the doors stared at it as if it were something rare. Angela Brooks stood on the mezzanine level above the lobby, reviewing schedules with Mr. Hayes. From there she could see nearly everything. The woman with the stroller from earlier was now seated with a housing specialist who offered her coffee and extra time. Walter Green had been personally escorted to the records office, where 2 employees searched archives with sudden enthusiasm. Even the maintenance worker who once felt invisible had 3 supervisors asking whether he needed assistance. Fear can move people quickly. Integrity moves them longer. Angela knew the difference and planned for both. "Temporary improvement is common after exposure," she said quietly. "We measure what remains next month." Mr. Hayes nodded and made a note. Below them, Sergeant Leon Mercer supervised the reassignment of lobby staff with calm efficiency. He had removed Daniel Carter from duty hours ago, but the larger task had only begun. Systems rarely fail because of one person alone. They fail because too many others learn to look away. In a small conference room near the chamber, board chair Patricia Lang met with department heads whose confidence had noticeably shrunk since morning. Angela entered carrying a thin folder. No dramatic entrance this time. No audience. Just the harder work that follows public moments. Patricia gestured to an open seat. "We are prepared to adopt emergency reforms," she said. "Today." Angela sat and opened the folder. "Then begin with measurable standards, not slogans." She distributed one-page summaries, mandatory greeting protocols, random service audits, complaint response deadlines, camera preservation rules, multilingual assistance desks, and quarterly public reporting. Some department heads frowned at the workload. Others recognized that discomfort is cheaper than scandal. One man from facilities cleared his throat. "Do we really need federal oversight for courtesy?" Angela looked at him steadily. When courtesy is withheld selectively, it becomes a civil rights issue. No one challenged her after that. Across town, Daniel Carter sat alone in a small administrative office waiting for instructions that did not come. His phone remained silent except for 2 messages from lawyers and one from a cousin asking what happened on the news clip already spreading online. He replayed the morning in his head, the doorway, the papers, the crowd, the question she asked. "Are you sure?" He had mistaken calmness for weakness because arrogance often cannot read anything else. Back at Civic Hall, residents continued stepping forward with stories. Some were recent. Some were 10 years old. A veteran denied seating. A grandmother spoken over. A contractor ignored until a white colleague repeated the same request. Each story by itself sounded small. Together they described architecture. Angela listened until her own voice grew tired. Then she listened more. Near sunset, she returned to the front steps where the day had begun. The stone was dry now, warm from late light. The teenager who recorded the morning scene approached nervously, holding his phone. He said, "I posted what happened. People are saying this city might finally change." Angela glanced toward the doors, where staff were still helping the last visitors of the day. "Cities do not change in one morning," she said. "People do. Then they decide whether the city deserves to follow." The teenager smiled slowly, as if handed something worth keeping. As Angela turned to leave, she noticed workers unscrewing an old metal plaque beside the entrance. In its place, they mounted a new one polished bright enough to catch the evening sun. "Public service begins here." For the first time, the words did not feel decorative. The next morning, people arrived at Richmond Civic Hall 30 minutes early just to see whether yesterday had been real. In cities where disappointment has history, hope often shows up cautiously. The sidewalks filled with residents carrying folders, envelopes, utility bills, court notices, and years of low expectations. They approached the front doors slowly, half expecting the old atmosphere to return the moment no cameras were present. Instead, they found fresh flowers in the lobby planter, clear directional signs, and a receptionist standing before sunrise with a practiced smile that looked awkward but sincere. "Good morning," she said to each person entering. Some visitors answered immediately. Others paused first, surprised by how long it had been since those words were offered freely. Angela Brooks arrived through a side entrance at 7:15 and moved through the building without announcement. She preferred unguarded moments. In the permit office, she watched a clerk walk an elderly couple through paperwork line by line. In records, she saw Walter Green laughing with a young employee who had located military documents missing for months. In housing services, the mother with the stroller was leaving with a confirmed appointment and tears of relief she no longer tried to hide. Improvement had begun, but Angela knew first. Impressions can be staged. The real test comes when no one thinks they are being observed. On the second floor, Mr. Hayes met her outside a conference room carrying overnight reports. "Complaint volume tripled," he said. "Not because conditions worsened. Because people finally believe someone might listen." Angela took the folder and nodded. Trust often enters as paperwork. Inside the room, Patricia Lang and department supervisors reviewed implementation charts pinned across the wall. Deadlines. Staffing gaps. Training schedules. Camera upgrades. Public feedback lines. Less dramatic than yesterday, more important than yesterday. Patricia looked tired in the productive way honest work creates. We can sustain this if leadership stays committed, she said. Angela glanced around the table. Commitment is measured when attention fades. No one mistook the meaning. Across town, Daniel Carter walked into headquarters through a rear entrance to avoid the morning press parked near the front lot. He had worn plain clothes for the first time in years and felt strangely unfinished without the badge at his waist. Inside a waiting room with grey walls and old magazines, he sat beside officers who did not greet him warmly anymore. Status leaves quickly when it is no longer useful. He replayed comments he had once made casually, jokes he had assumed disappeared after being spoken. Yesterday proved they had only been waiting. Back at Civic Hall, Angela held an open listening session in the chamber where Daniel had sat the day before. This time the room felt different. Lighter, but sharper. Residents stepped to the microphone one after another. A contractor described losing bids after being ignored at check-in. A college student said she stopped applying for internships after being mistaken for janitorial staff twice. A retired teacher spoke about bringing her grandson to renew identification and watching the boy learn distrust before multiplication tables. Angela wrote notes by hand for each speaker. Not because notes alone solve anything, but because being recorded honestly is where dignity often begins. Near noon, a city janitor named Lewis approached the microphone. Nervously. I clean these halls every night, he said. Yesterday was the first time people looked at me like I worked here instead of through me. The chamber grew quiet. Angela thanked him with the same tone she used for attorneys and executives. Equality is often heard before it is seen. After the session ended, she returned to the front steps where the new plaque caught the sun. Public service begins here. Children waiting with parents traced the letters with curious fingers. Angela watched them for a moment, then looked up as more residents climbed the stairs without hesitation. Yesterday they entered cautiously. Today they entered expecting to belong. That was how systems truly changed, not when buildings apologized, but when people stopped asking permission to walk inside. 3 days later, the line outside Richmond Civic Hall wrapped halfway around the block before the doors even opened. Some people came for permits. Some came for hearings. Many came simply to see whether fairness could survive past headlines. News vans were gone now. No cameras hovered near the curb. No reporters asked dramatic questions. This was the quieter stage where real change usually fails. Angela Brooks knew that better than anyone. She arrived before sunrise carrying a paper cup of coffee and a folder thick with overnight metrics. Wait times had dropped by 40%. Complaint acknowledgements were being sent within 24 hours. Missed appointments were down because reminder calls had started. Small numbers, practical numbers, the kind that rarely trend online and yet reshape daily life. Mr. Hayes joined her in the lobby as clerks prepared stations. You were right, he said. Once people felt respected, they became easier to serve. Angela set the folder on the counter. Most conflict begins long before voices rise. On the first floor, Sergeant Leon Mercer trained security staff beside the entrance. Ask questions clearly. Explain delays. Keep rules consistent, he repeated. He had removed the old habit of barking orders and replaced it with plain professionalism. Some officers adapted quickly. Others struggled with the idea that courtesy was not weakness. Angela watched for a moment, then moved upstairs for the final disciplinary review connected to Daniel Carter's case. The hearing room was smaller than the public chamber and absent of spectators. No applause. No gasps. Just records, policy language, and consequences written in neutral fonts. Daniel sat at one end of the table in a grey suit that looked borrowed from a better season of his life. He seemed older than he had 3 days earlier. Not by years. By certainty. Across from him sat Internal Affairs Counsel, city attorneys, and Patricia Lang. Angela entered last and took her seat quietly. Daniel glanced at her, then lowered his eyes first. Patricia opened the file. After review of footage, complaint history, witness statements, and policy violations, this board finds repeated misconduct inconsistent with public service standards. Her voice remained steady. Employment is terminated effective immediately. Certification review is recommended. Daniel inhaled sharply but did not argue. Perhaps he understood arguments require credibility, and credibility had already left the room. Patricia continued. You may make a final statement for the record. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he spoke toward the table. I thought respect came with the badge. His voice was rough with something new and unwelcome. I did not realize I had forgotten how to give it without one. No one rushed to comfort him. Accountability is not cruelty, but neither is it rescue. Angela folded her hands. The badge did not fail you, Officer Carter, she said. It revealed what you practiced when no one challenged you. Daniel nodded once, small and defeated. The meeting ended with signatures instead of speeches. Outside, sunlight spilled through the lobby windows where families and workers moved steadily through service lines. Life had continued while one man's authority ended, as it always does. Angela stepped onto the front stairs after the hearing. The same stone where papers once scattered now held a new information table staffed by volunteers helping residents fill out forms. Walter Green sat nearby giving directions like he had worked there for years. The young mother with the stroller laughed with a clerk carrying coloring books for waiting children. Lewis the janitor polished the railings and greeted everyone by name. Daniel exited through a side door carrying a cardboard box with desk items and a folded jacket. He paused when he saw Angela at the top of the steps. For a moment he looked as though he wanted forgiveness, explanation, or the past. Instead he received only truth. Angela met his eyes and said quietly, the loudest power often belongs to the weakest man. Then she turned back toward the doors as another family approached, and without hesitation, held them open. 2 weeks later, Richmond Civic Hall had settled into something rare and powerful, consistency. There were no crowds gathered outside now, no tense whispers, no curiosity seekers waiting to witness drama. The city had moved on, which was exactly how Angela Brooks knew the work was becoming real. True reform does not live in spectacle. It survives in ordinary mornings. The front steps were clean and busy under a clear blue sky. Residents entered with folders tucked under their arms, coffee cups in hand, children beside them, shoulders relaxed instead of braced. The sign near the door still read all visitors will be treated with courtesy and respect, but no one stared at it anymore. It had become believable. Inside, service windows opened on time. Staff greeted people by name when they could and with dignity when they could not. Wait times remained low. Complaint responses were tracked publicly on a screen in the lobby. If a desk fell behind schedule, supervisors stepped in instead of hiding it. The building had not become perfect. It had become accountable, which was harder and worth more. Angela walked through the lobby one final time with Mr. Hayes beside her. 90-day indicators project continued improvement, he said, handing her the latest report. Public trust scores are the highest in 10 years. Angela glanced across the room where Walter Green was helping a young veteran complete benefits paperwork. Near the elevators, the mother with the stroller now volunteered twice a week guiding first-time visitors. Lewis the janitor had been promoted to facilities coordinator and wore the title with the same humility he once wore in visibility. People repair systems faster than systems repair people, Angela said softly. But both can heal if someone starts honestly. In a conference room upstairs, Patricia Lang and the board signed the final adoption of permanent oversight measures. Independent audits. Transparent hiring reviews. Community advisory seats. Quarterly public forums. procedures written so that fairness would not depend on who happened to be in charge. Patricia capped her pen and smiled with tired satisfaction. "You know," she said, "we thought we were hiring an investigator." Angela gathered her folders. "You hired a mirror." Later that afternoon, Angela stepped outside carrying only a slim briefcase. The same front steps where papers once scattered in the rain were warm beneath the spring sun. A city bus hissed to a stop nearby. Children laughed from the plaza fountain across the street. The building behind her sounded different now, less like authority and more like service. She paused at the new plaque mounted by the entrance. "Public service begins here." Her reflection moved across the polished metal for a second, then disappeared as families passed between her and the light. Across the street, a man in plain clothes waited at a bus stop holding a cardboard box with old desk items inside. Daniel Carter looked smaller without bitterness to inflate him. He noticed Angela, hesitated, then crossed halfway before stopping at the curb. Traffic passed between them. "Director Brooks," he called. She turned. There was no anger left in his voice, only the rough shape of humility learning to speak. "I was wrong." Angela studied him for a moment. Some apologies asked to be excused. This one only wanted to be heard. "Then do something right with what you learned," she said. The walk signal changed. Daniel nodded once and stepped back. It was enough. Angela descended the stairs and headed toward the waiting black sedan at the curb. Mr. Hayes opened the rear door, but she did not enter immediately. Instead, she looked once more at the stream of residents moving through those doors without fear, without hesitation, without needing anyone's permission. Then she smiled faintly and said the words that would be repeated in that building for years after she left. "Respect costs nothing. Arrogance costs everything." She entered the car, and as it pulled away, Richmond Civic Hall continued doing the quiet work of justice without needing her to stay.